And our final sort of speaker is Dr. Wapenaar. I hope I got her pronunciation correct. Thank you very much indeed. She qualified in Holland. They have a different system where you split into various streams before you qualify. Am I correct? And you qualified as a farm animal veterinarian in Utrecht. You've been to New Zealand. You've worked in New Zealand. You've worked in Prince Edward Island on the Canadian East Coast. And now you've come, I don't know why you've come, but you've come back to Nottingham. I'm sure there's a good reason. I'm sure nothing wrong with the university, but scenery-wise, I don't think you can beat New Zealand on the west coast or the east coast of Canada. So there she's the School of Veterinary Medicine and Science in Nottingham.
Right, thank you very much everyone for being here. I think we're in quite a unique location. This may be one of the reasons why I live in England, to be able to be here, I guess. I think it's quite a nice place that the RCVS has picked out. I would like to give an example out of farm animal practice. So the study, it's a little study that I'm going to talk about, and it sort of came about when Hannah Griffiths, one of the vet students at Nottingham University, came to me and she said, "Oh, Wendela, how would you treat a uterine prolapse in a cow?" And I explained what I would do, and she looked a bit disappointed, and I was like, "Well, what's going on?" And she said, "Well, I was in the EMS placements, and they did this and this treatment, and it was a bit different than what I was used to, because in the previous practice they did this and this and this, and it was slightly different again." And as a keen Nottingham student, she says, "Oh, I looked it up in the textbook, and then the textbook said something different again. And now I ask you, and now you say something different again. What am I supposed to do when I graduate?" And I guess I should have said, "Well, you should just do what I do, because that's the right thing to do." But I was a bit naive, I guess, or perhaps an idealistic person. And I said, "Well, maybe you should make this your research project." So in third year, they have to do a 12-week research project. And Hannah took on, I guess, the task to try to write up a practical guideline for a uterine prolapse. Right, so she looked into the literature, and obviously, but I guess after a lot of the talks that we heard this morning, there is not a lot of really strong evidence. There's lots of weak evidence, there's lots of anecdotal reports, case reports, there's lots of information there, but not a lot of strong evidence. And then we had a discussion and we said, "Oh, well, what do we do then? What do we do if there is no really good randomized controlled trial?" And we said, "Oh, well, we can be really clever and try to design an ICT. And if you think hard about it, designing a good ICT for a uterine prolapse, the treatment and management of a uterine prolapse, I'm not even sure if I'm clever enough to do that, but even if I would be clever enough, it's going to be really even more difficult, I think, to find someone who wants to pay for that. So it's quite unrealistic, I think, to be able to believe that you'll achieve that. So if you can't do that, what are you going to do then? And we said, well, let's try to harness these weaker forms of evidence. So harness some expert opinion, harness all the expertise that's out there in the field. So that's what we attempted to do. So did a structured literature review to try at least to collect all the information that's out there currently. And then we developed an online questionnaire that went out to any practitioner worldwide who has treated one or more prolapse in their career and asked them lots of different questions. And then we followed that up with an expert opinion panel using a Delphi method. And I just want to show you just snippets of the results of some of the things that came out. So we asked them, do you use an epidural? Well, 76%, yes, I always use an epidural. 3% says, no, I never use an epidural. Not perfect, but quite a bit of consensus there. Same for parenteral antibiotics. So yeah, 72% would say, yep, I always give them parenteral antibiotics. 8% would say, nope, I never do that. Bit more contentious areas are, for example, intrauterine medication or vaginal sutures, where with the intrauterine medication you get a bit of a variety, and I just picked 3 of the most common categories that came out. So 62% would say, yes, I use antibiotics in the uterus. 16% would say, no, I use antiseptics in the uterus. 21% were quite confident in saying, no, there should be nothing going into the uterus, nothing in the uterus but sperm, are some of the comments that are being made by some of the practitioners or respondents to the questionnaire. Vaginal sutures also, it's a similar contentious area. So close to 60% of the people would say, yeah, always place vaginal sutures, but there was also close to 20% who said, no, you should never do that. That's really not necessary. Anyway, so those type of things came out. The other short result that I wanted to share with you is about the prognosis. So we asked the respondents to estimate the proportion of prolapse cases that become pregnant in their next lactation or in their next season if they would be a beef cow. So 50% of the respondents believe that half to 3/4 of the cows become pregnant in their next lactation. And I'm going to come back to that by the end of these 10 minutes. So concluding from that survey, I think one of the most important things, perhaps particularly for today, is the positive feedback. We had lots of positive feedback so we had around 700 respondents worldwide from I think 46 different countries. Lots of really in the free text bit at the end of the questionnaire where people could give comments. It was like, oh, well, that's really interesting. Finally, a questionnaire that talks about something that is relevant to us. Can we get the information back? Where can we find the results? I would love to hear what other people are doing. So really lots of positive feedback. The other thing that I wanted to mention is the reliability of responses. Because if we talk about evidence-based medicine, how reliable do we know that these responses are? I can't prove that what all these 700 respondents said is actually true, right? I have to believe that the information that they give me is true. However, I would argue that there's no reason why those respondents should be lying to us, right? It's an anonymous questionnaire. It's the information is going to be fed back to them, so they're only going to be winning if they provide relevant and accurate information. However, there's also some estimates there. So we would ask them, how many prolapses have you treated in your career thus far? Well, I'm not sure how good everyone's record keeping is, but there's not a lot of people who would know exactly how many prolapses they've treated in their career. So the reliability of respondents needs, or the reliability of responses needs critical appraisal, I guess. But perhaps an even more interesting point is this truly evidence-based medicine? Because that's what some people would criticize me, to say, yeah, well, you just collect a whole load of answers, but how do you know that that's actually the truth? And that is actually true, right? It could all be, I guess people would call it collective ignorance, right? All of us could be doing the wrong thing. That's not very likely, but that is possible. Hence why there's stronger sources of evidence or stronger ways to collect evidence. However, I would argue that in the absence of any stronger evidence and in the absence of the opportunity perhaps to get stronger evidence, if I need to advise Hannah on how she's going to treat a prolapse, and she is actually graduated at the moment, so she might be treating a prolapse at the moment, I'd rather have her take the approach that was collected from a review of what 700 practitioners worldwide are doing, that together with all the literature that we went through, I'd rather have her take that approach than that she would just copy what I would do if I would be in practice. Right, so from that point of view, I do think it belongs in the area of evidence-based medicine. However, you need to be really careful in how you appraise and how you use the data. Right, so we had all this information from the questionnaire. Next step was the Delphi method, because as you could see from the previous results, there were some contentious areas. Those contentious areas, we asked a group of experts to look at those areas again. So we provided a group of panel experts with all the information from the questionnaire and asked them to focus on those areas that we couldn't really get any consensus on. So they provided answers. We asked them to reassess their own answer that they gave in the first place. Then we fed back in another round the information to the same group of experts again. So we told the experts what the other experts were thinking and said, oh, well, does that change your mind, or do you still stick with what you believe is the right thing to do? And then from that, we came out with a practical guideline of what we thought would be the best way to go about treating and managing a cow with a uterine prolapse. So that was the outcome of the study. So to summarize, I guess, the plural of anecdote is not data. And I totally agree with that. We have to be really careful with how we appraise and how we use data. But on the other hand, I do believe that it's very, very valuable and that we can do lots of worthwhile stuff with it. So we then think of how to move forward. I think the use of practice-based data there's an opportunity there that we, I think, don't want to miss. And I just wanted to give perhaps that prognosis that we've asked the respondents for as an example, right? So we asked these respondents for, how long do you think a cow will last, or will she get pregnant in her next lactation? If we could get access to practice data and that data is available in practices of how many prolapse cases they've treated, just a cow ID, and the date that they've fixed the prolapse, we can look up in the movement records how long those cows have survived in the herd, and we can actually calculate an evidence-based or more evidence-based survival rate of cows with uterine prolapse. And that would be really much stronger evidence to then go back to your client and say, well, out of so many cows treated in the UK in the past 5 years, this is their average survival time, and that's sort of the range that you can expect. And that is a bit better evidence, I would argue, than just me thinking, well, yeah, on average, she probably got a 70% chance of getting pregnant next year. Right, so I think that practice-based data is extremely valuable, and there's lots of opportunities there. Priorities, so priorities, I think, at the moment, if you want to do something like that, that sounds fairly easy. So it sounds fairly easy if we're going to ask practices to sort of collect that information for perhaps a university or the Centre for Evidence-Based Veterinary Medicine for us, and then we need a person that is going to sort of collate that information, critically appraise it again to make sure that the data that we're looking at is actually accurate and is reliable, and then analyze that information, and perhaps most importantly, feed that information back to the practitioners, because if we're just going to analyze it and publish it somewhere and it doesn't go back to the people who provided to us in the first place, then it's very unlikely that that relationship between practices and veterinary research institute, I guess, will keep on working. So I think that is a priority, and that sounds a bit vague perhaps, but I guess what it comes down to is that someone needs to fund that person that's going to do that work, and I think that's a priority. Challenges lie, I would argue, I think, predominantly in time management. So I don't think, if I think about all the responses we got to this questionnaire and how positive everyone was about it, I don't think vets are not interested in evidence-based medicine or evidence-based practice. I think they just really struggle to find the time or the mental space, or what was mentioned before, to get their head around it and to find the time to do it properly. I think that's a real challenge, and I also think that that's where the opportunities lie. So with all the information technology that we've got, I think we can do much cleverer things than what we used to do, whatever, 10, 15 years ago. And if you look at other professions, they collect data and analyze and deal with data in quite, I guess, flashy ways compared to what we do in veterinary medicine. And I think looking into those areas is definitely something that's worth it. And I guess to conclude, I think that's particularly important for farm animal, because I guess that's where my example here comes from. I think perhaps, and maybe I'm slightly biased, but compared to companion animal practice, I think within farm animal practice there's quite a bit of competition currently. Right, we've got, and not so much between vets, also between vets, but that might be the same in the companion animal industry. But if you go onto a farm, there's lots of other people that want to try to take over some of our services on farm. We've got nutritionists, reproductive biologists, animal scientists, farm advisors with whatever background they have. And I think using evidence-based medicine to sort of strengthen our position on farm is really, really important. Thank you.